Imagine a situation where a person finds themselves in an environment where their perception of the world differs drastically from everyone else's. It's like attending a social event with a unique device that allows them to see what's hidden from ordinary sight. While everyone around them enjoys superficial conversations and entertainment, they notice deep and unobvious things, as if observing distant galaxies that no one even suspects exist. When trying to share their discoveries, they face misunderstanding and alienation. Those around them don't share their vision, and as a result they are forced to pretend, agreeing with the generally accepted reality. Many people prefer not to talk about such experiences, the ability to foresee events, feel hidden emotions, and catch the slightest changes in mood. This happens not by choice, but as an inevitable consequence of heightened perception. Over time, explaining it becomes increasingly difficult. How to convey the feeling of burden that arises from seeing what others prefer to ignore? As Carl Jung once noted, loneliness does not arise from the absence of people, but from the inability to share what seems important. If this thought resonates, then this feeling is familiar. A person sees impending problems in relationships, signs of emotional burnout, lies behind a mask of politeness, and longing hidden behind a facade of success. When they try to talk about it, they often hear in response, "You're too intrusive, you dig too deep, you analyze everything excessively." But in reality, it's not about analysis, but about a heightened sense of feeling that has accompanied them for a long time. As a result, silence seems safer than honesty, because every attempt to share the truth causes discomfort in others. They are not ready for it, they do not ask for it, and in the end the person stops offering their vision of the world to avoid rejection and misunderstanding. This will be about a little-known side of high intelligence, especially emotional and spiritual intelligence. It is important not only to possess knowledge, but also to have a depth of experience. It is this awareness and feeling that sets a person apart from the general mass, tuning them into a unique wave of perception. However, there is a price to pay for this increased sensitivity. Statistical data shows that people in the top 2% of intelligence are several times more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and a sense of social isolation. The reason lies not in their mental instability, but in the continuous processing of information that most people simply do not notice. Their nervous system works to the limit of its capabilities, the mind knows no rest, and the heart contains experiences that others are not ready to touch. Outwardly, they may seem ordinary, laughing at the right moments, skillfully masking their inner depth. They have perfectly mastered the art of being invisible, until one day the burden becomes unbearable. Then questions arise, but not about what's wrong with me, but about what to do with it. Attempts to soften their words, suppress their individuality, and agree with the opinion of the majority do not bring relief. Perhaps this emotional pain is not a problem, but a signal indicating that the person is not destined to remain in a zone of comfort and superficial relationships. Carl Jung studied human behavior not to bring everyone to a common denominator, but to help people find wholeness. He understood that it is precisely our differences, depth, the ability to see the dark sides of life, and a unique vision of the world, that are not a disadvantage, but a calling. But before realizing this truth, it is necessary to delve into oneself, into those parts of the personality that have long been ignored, into the voices that have been silenced, into the images that have shaped relationships, aspirations, and fears. It is there that the keys to understanding oneself are stored, the very anima and animus that Jung spoke of, and they are patiently waiting for their time. What if the battlefield is not outside us, but inside, and the enemy wears our own face? Carl Jung hypothesized that in every person there lies a hidden essence, an invisible companion, predetermined not by personal choice, but by nature itself. In the male consciousness, this is the anima, the hidden feminine principle. In the female consciousness, it is the animus, its male equivalent. However, this is not just a reflection of gender characteristics. These are archetypal forces, dynamic and multifaceted, often buried so deep that their destructive influence becomes apparent only in moments of life's failures. Have you ever had a feeling of sudden and inexplicable obsession with a person you barely know, or perhaps causeless irritation at the sight of someone who awakens in you vague, indefinable memories? Have you ever committed acts completely uncharacteristic of your nature, obeying an unknown voice? This is the manifestation of inner others. In men, the anima can manifest through sudden mood swings, uncontrollable desires, or excessive idealization of romantic partners. In women, the animus, on the other hand, can be expressed as incessant self-criticism, overly intellectual dogmatism, or emotional coldness. The less aware a person is of these inner forces, the more chaos they can bring into their lives. Jung did not idealize the powerful forces of the human psyche. On the contrary, he warned of the power lurking within them. He emphasized their danger, especially when they remain unattended. As Jung himself wrote, these forces possess a fateful inevitability capable of leading to tragic consequences. The deeper one delves into the essence of things, the more acutely one feels, and the more one notices what escapes others, the more active these inner figures become. Inner clarity exposes hidden shadows. What a person refuses to confront within themselves will haunt them in the external world. They may fall in love with an illusion of someone who reflects their unlived life, or engage in conflicts with partners not because of their actions, but because of what they have awakened within. A person will be tossed back and forth between longing and alienation, between the need for excessive attention and distrust. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest associate, succinctly noted, "The animus creates loneliness in women, and the anima pushes men into the whirlpool of relationships and the associated confusion." This is not just a theory, but a reflection of life experience. Recall how many times one has been overwhelmed by inexplicable emotional waves. How many disputes arose not because of a specific person, but because of something more ancient, deeper, and unspoken. This is why Jung's teachings are more relevant today than ever. The struggle is not only with society, systems, or relationships, but with oneself, until one realizes that the enemy is often a part of oneself, a part to which one has not yet listened. Otherwise, painful cycles will repeat again and again. But once you see the anima or animus not as a flaw but as a guide, everything begins to change. A person stops blaming others and begins to integrate, reclaiming those parts of themselves that they projected onto others. This is a complex process that requires honesty, a willingness to embrace disorder, emotions, and disorientation, as it involves looking in the mirror. Not the one hanging on the wall, but the one inside. A mirror that shows who a person pretended to be, who they are not, what parts of themselves they rejected, what voices they silenced, and what chaos they feared. However, when a person finds the strength to stand their ground and confront their inner demons, amazing metamorphoses occur. The obsessive projections that distort reality lose their power, the crippling panic subsides, and the desperate desire for someone outside to solve all the problems gradually dissolves. This happens because there is no longer a pointless expectation of a miraculous rescue. Instead, a meticulous effort begins to build a bridge between the past self and the future, renewed self. The one who dares to cross this bridge is no longer burdened by the old weight, as they have stopped running from it. They have found the courage to turn around, face their fears, listen to them, and having done so, confidently lead them forward. Some people bear their burdens in deep silence, while others try to convey their truth to those around them. A prime example is the tragic figure of Cassandra, who was gifted with prophetic abilities by the gods. She saw the future with frightening clarity, but having rejected the love of the god Apollo, was cursed by him. The curse was not the deprivation of her gift, but the fact that no one believed her prophecies. She spoke the truth, warned of impending disaster, and screamed when the Trojans opened the gates for the wooden horse, but her words went unheeded. It wasn't that she was wrong, exaggerated, or mentally unstable. She was simply overlooked. The story of Cassandra still resonates in people's hearts because it is not just a myth, but a kind of mirror reflecting reality. How many times have we each sensed impending doom? How many times have we said, something is not right here, but our fears were dismissed as insignificant. How many times have we been told that we are too emotional, too anxious, too thoughtful, and then exactly what we warned about came true? We weren't trying to be right, we just wanted to be heard. However, the world is often not ready to accept the truth that comes too early. Most people prefer to close their eyes to the obvious until it is too late, and those who see, feel, and speak first often seem unstable, uncomfortable, and overly sensitive to what is happening. However, what happens when a person isn't prone to outward displays of emotion? What if they simply remain awake among a multitude of sleepers? This burden of awareness was well known to Carl Jung. The one with great knowledge is isolated, he asserted. After all, awareness not only sheds light but also creates a chasm. It forms a distance between personal knowledge and the ability to express it. And in this space, doubts arise. Perhaps the question arises, is there too much knowledge? Maybe trust in one's own clarity of perception is undermined. And then the person begins to shrink, not because of a loss of vision, but because of an awareness of the price that must be paid for the truth. In a world that strives for lightness, truth becomes an unaffordable luxury. This is where the danger lies. The more a person is ignored, the stronger the temptation to fall silent, to stop speaking before someone else does it for them. They learn to read the mood of society before looking into their own soul. They begin to censor their own observations just to remain surrounded by those who only accept their silent version. This is the quiet demise of a visionary, not because their vision weakens, but because they stop sharing it. After all, silence causes less pain than rejection. But there is a price to pay for this silence. There comes a moment, a turning point, when a person feels that if they hide their truth again, they risk losing it forever. The more they adapt to others, the more they dissolve into them. In the end, the person who pleases others is no longer themselves. And here a fork appears in the road. Standing at the crossroads between speaking the truth, which threatens exile, and silence, which equates to the loss of one's own identity, is a dilemma as old as time. Throughout human history, there have been souls faced with a similar choice. And now we're not talking about a fortune teller, but about a crowned head, a wise ruler whose decision sheds light on what it means to possess a clear vision in a world mired in madness. This story may become a mirror in which everyone can see themselves. Chapter 4: The Wise King and the Poisoned Well. Once upon a time, there was a king whose fame resounded not because of the might of his armies, but because of his insight. He ruled a city where reason triumphed over everything. Justice was not an empty formality, but a reality. The residents felt heard and understood. The king preferred to listen rather than speak. He was not perfect, but his wisdom served as an unshakable foundation for the kingdom. One night, as the city fell into the embrace of sleep, a cunning witch crept to the only well and poisoned it with her potion. At dawn, everyone except the king drank from the poisoned source. By noon, madness had gripped the kingdom. People spoke incoherently, accusing each other of misdeeds they had never committed. They forgot that current day they were overcome with fears of non-existent things. They praised nonsense. And worst of all, they seemed perfectly normal to each other. It was the king who now seemed like a stranger, strange and distant. When he tried to reach their minds, to warn them of the impending danger, his words went unheeded. His subjects looked at him with suspicion. Plots were hatched behind his back. He began to be considered mentally ill. By nightfall, a conspiracy had matured to overthrow the king from the throne, not for any of his missteps, but because he remained true to himself. In the solitude of his chambers, the monarch, clutching a cup filled with water from the ill-fated well, faces a dilemma: drink and gain the recognition of his subjects, or reject the offering and face exile. On that fateful night, he made his choice. He drained the cup. In the morning, the townspeople were overjoyed. "Our king has become one of us again," they exclaimed, unaware of the internal struggle tearing at his soul. He was aware of what was happening, but he did not reach a deep understanding. He simply stopped trying to be understood by his subjects. And madness clothed in forms of politeness, order, and even glory, continued its march. However, this parable is not just a story about kings and magic wells. It has a direct bearing on the present moment, on each of us. If the reader has ever hidden their true insight, striving for universal approval, if they have ever forced themselves to laugh at someone else's jokes so as not to stand out from the crowd, if they have ever mechanically nodded in agreement while their inner voice screamed in disagreement, then they too have drunk from this well. Perhaps this happened unconsciously. Perhaps they have been poisoning themselves drop by drop for years, gradually abandoning those facets of their personality that allowed them to see the world too clearly, feel too deeply, speak too frankly. Perhaps he has polished his truth so skillfully that it now fits effortlessly into conversations that once seemed unbearable. But behind this apparent comfort lies a deep sadness, a sorrow born of betraying one's own truth to preserve an illusory peace. In his insightful reflections, Carl Jung warned against the dissolution of the individual into the collective consciousness. He emphasized that the greatest danger lies not in making mistakes, but in losing one's individuality, in substituting personal clarity for the fleeting applause of the crowd, and in abandoning independent thought to maintain belonging to a group. Jung deeply understood that the process of individuation, the full realization of one's potential, requires solitude and stepping outside of conventional norms, even those shared by loved ones. This path involves a bold confrontation with the pain of recognizing one's uniqueness, with the silence of loneliness, and with the fear of being misunderstood. However, Jung also left humanity with a glimmer of hope. He asserted that if a person performs their work honestly and conscientiously, despite isolation, they will inevitably be found by unknown friends. These are not saviors or adoring crowds, but genuine people who are not frightened by the truth, do not demand pretense, do not mistake clarity for coldness or deep feelings for melodrama. But finding such like-minded individuals is impossible while continuing to go with the flow and pretending to be someone you are not. They will only be found when a person stands guard over their truth, even if it entails the loss of social recognition, when they maintain clarity of thought in a world mired in chaos, and when they speak openly, not out of considerations of safety, but out of a desire for sincerity. Perhaps someone is not yet ready for this. Perhaps they are still clinging to illusions and weighing the cost of freedom. This is perfectly natural. But it is important to remember that every time a person chooses to see injustice and remain silent, a part of their personality fades away. And conversely, every time they speak out, even in a trembling voice and into the void, they preserve something alive, rare, and sacred within themselves. That spark that is intended not for adapting to society, but for awakening sleeping souls. Chapter 5. The Silent Price of Insight. Not all suffering is blatant. Some, like an invisible burden, weigh heavily on the shoulders right in the middle of a lively conversation, forcing a strained smile while the person is oppressed by the weight of the unspoken. They do not erupt in a thunderous cry, but rather hum quietly into consciousness, barely discernible against the backdrop of everyday bustle. To be one who possesses the gift of seeing more means not only recognizing pain, but also sometimes pretending to be blind, often unconsciously. Imagine a situation, a dinner party, where a barbed word suddenly slips into a casual conversation and the atmosphere instantly changes. A person with heightened perception picks up on this tension before others, noticing fleeting glances, barely perceptible changes in facial expressions, the subtlest shades of alienation. They feel that something has happened, but the others seem to be oblivious. And then they choose silence, not wanting to be that person again, anticipating the inevitable outcome, accusations of being overly sensitive and prone to exaggeration. As a result, the person begins to doubt their own adequacy, not because their perception is wrong, but because of simple fatigue, the fatigue of being the only one who recognizes the unseen. And so they begin to censor themselves, restraining impulses, bestowing strained smiles on those around them, simplifying their thoughts so that they do not cause rejection. They willingly engage in empty talk, even if it empties them from the inside. They are silent not because of a lack of words, but because they have learned a bitter lesson. The truth is unwelcome in a society that prefers ignorance. Psychologists call this masking, others pretense, and Jung might have called it a loss of soul. Whatever this phenomenon is defined as, the result remains unchanged. The person begins to dissolve into the crowd, and no one notices because their visible shell continues to function, appear in public, and utter socially approved phrases. But the true essence, the full and multifaceted personality, hides deep beneath the surface, unspoken, undervalued, and unattainable. This is the silent price of insight, not in the suffering caused by misunderstanding, but in the gradual erosion caused by constantly understanding others and the absence of reciprocal understanding. Eventually, the person begins to perceive as normal their role as an adapter, one who takes on emotional labor, absorbs the discomfort of others, just to maintain the illusion of well-being in the surrounding space. However, it is in this that the hidden danger lies. The person so skillfully suppresses their true feelings and experiences that over time they themselves forget about their existence. The price for such oblivion is inevitable and can manifest in the most unexpected forms. It could be a devastating burnout, a sudden attack of causeless melancholy, or the bitter realization that those around you value only your silent agreement, not your sincerity and truthfulness. It is at this moment that the real work on oneself begins, the process of individuation, as Jung defined it. Its essence lies not only in discovering one's own essence, but also in getting rid of the layers and masks that had to be tried on for survival. It's not just an awakening, it's a return to those corners of the soul where the voice of truth once sounded freely, to those insights that one shared before they were rejected, to those intuitive premonitions that one followed until the world taught one to doubt them. But the path back to oneself is not strewn with roses. As soon as a person begins to gain clarity and insight, they immediately lose their protective disguise, becoming visible again, but no longer as a submissive and agreeing version of themselves, but as a genuine personality. And here again a feeling of loneliness arises because many of those who are nearby may never have met this new, awakening version of the person, and some may not want to accept it at all. However, you should not let this stop you. After all, the life that a person dreams of, the connections that they strive for, the freedom that they deserve, are only on the other side of pretense and hypocrisy. And when a person stops hiding, something amazing happens. The burden does not disappear, but it begins to transform. It is no longer an oppressive secret, not a corroding shame, but something else, useful and even sacred. The burden begins to radiate light. Chapter 6 tells how a heavy burden gradually transforms into a guiding beacon, and this process is so imperceptible that it is difficult to grasp. A person who once perceived their insight as a curse suddenly begins to offer it to others as a saving lantern. And it's not that the world around has become simpler, but that the person themselves has changed, ceasing to see a problem in their perception and apologize for their depth. They realize that their heightened sensitivity is not a disadvantage, but a compass pointing the right way, that inner chaos is not random noise but valuable guidance. Carl Jung called this individuation the integration of the holistic self, and not the version of oneself that was censored and compromised for the sake of universal approval. It is about accepting the real, complete self, with the sacred contradictions of the soul and shadow, logic and feelings, chaos and clarity, united by courage. And this courage manifests itself not in domination, but in unwavering steadfastness, in the ability to speak, even when the voice trembles with excitement, to remain true to one's principles when others try to break them, to tell the truth, not to prove one's rightness, but to preserve authenticity. And when a person finds this integrity, people begin to appear. Not noisy crowds, but kindred spirits, quiet observers who can see not only the mask, but also the light shimmering in the eyes, people who have gone through their trials and recognize the traces of burns on someone else's soul. They don't need explanations, they understand everything anyway. And for the first time in a long time, a person feels it. A click, a resonance, a quiet yes. A feeling that there is no need to embellish anything to be accepted, that their voice is not too loud, their vision is not too strange, and the burden is no longer a lonely cross, but has turned into a bridge, a beacon, something that not only leads forward, but also calls others. Perhaps that is why a person was destined to carry this burden for so long, not to suffer, but to lead, not offering ready-made answers, but sharing their presence, not demonstrating perfection, but sharing their depth. The world does not need people who fit into the framework. It needs those who can see, feel, accept complexity, and move forward with love. It needs just such a person. So, if these lines have reached you at the right moment, let it serve as a sign. Do not remain indifferent. Say at least a word. Leave your response in the comments. Write, for example, "Stay awake." This appeal is addressed not to soulless algorithms, but to those who perhaps are quietly scrolling through the feed in search of confirmation of their adequacy, integrity, and the absence of loneliness in their solitude. And if you suddenly forgot about the value of your inner light, let these words remind you, it was never just a burden, it was not just a weight, it has always been the harbinger of your radiance.